Strange detour. Jack Parsons, his world of rockets, the occult, and his influence on NASA. By day, Parsons' unorthodox genius created a solid rocket fuel that helped the Allies win World War II, and NASA sent spacecraft to the moon. By night, Parsons called himself the Antichrist when he performed Aleister Crowley's Thelemic rituals to create a new sort of human being that would finally destroy Christianity. I found some very interesting information on Jack Parsons, who was purported to have been a brilliant rocket scientist. I wrote this video according to the two sources I cited in this video, giving them the benefit of the doubt that their information is correct, since it's difficult to verify a lot of it. However, while you are viewing this video series, you will see more than a few hints that the full story about Parsons may not as of yet been written. Therefore, I leave it up to the viewer to decide for themselves as to whether they see the need to go beyond the official narrative of this rather interesting and colorful character. However, the official narrative for Jack Parsons makes for some very interesting viewing on its own, given his influence on rocket science. And as per the quote under this video title, there were two sides to Parsons, his world of rockets by day and his world of the occult by night. In addition, these same people will be surprised to learn that Parsons' passion for rocketry particularly paved the road to rocket technology that is still in use today. This is all the more amazing, given that Parsons' formal education was no more than a high school diploma. His theories were incorporated into the overall design of rocket technology in general, which included the Apollo moon missions, all of which went no further than low Earth orbit, if even that, has been established in part 1 of this series, and the space shuttle, which was retired in 2011. And in his spare time, Parsons, with an equal amount of passion, studied the world of the occult and the works of the well-known Satanist Aleister Crowley, with whom he maintained a close correspondence. His world of the occult eventually becomes his driving force, which is apparent later on in his career, with many coincidences along the way that seems beyond belief. NASA tends to be hesitant on its recognition of Jack Parsons, presumably due to his unorthodox background and the fact that he wasn't the usual academic or trained scientist. But there is some information about Parsons on the NASA website, though very little, given its contribution to the aerospace industry. NASA tends to be hesitant on its recognition of Jack Parsons, presumably due to his unorthodox background and the fact that he wasn't the usual academic or trained scientist. But Parsons had the look of a man who was easily to have been mistaken for a Hollywood actor, rather than the usual look of the serious scientist deep in thought in a classroom or lecture hall writing down equations on a blackboard. Further, it is not often that a man who not only lacked the recognized academic credentials, but was also a passionate pursuer of the occult, would have the influence that he did on the whole world arena of rocket propulsion systems. This included the fact that he not only co-founded the Aerojet Corporation, later named Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but also had a lunar crater named after him. However, as will be discussed, Jack Parsons' world by day would eventually come into contact with his world by night. He would slowly move away from the industry he so passionately devoted most of his career to, and immerse himself into the world of the occult with equal passion. Ironically, he would eventually find himself working in the film industry, not as an actor, but in the world of special effects. But as you will learn, both of his worlds would inevitably collide, bringing an instant and early end to the world of Jack Parsons. This is a man who is just now being revered for his contribution to an industry dominated by the appearance of the stereotypical-looking, suited, dark-rimmed glasses academics. History. Jack Parsons was born in Los Angeles on October 2nd, 1914. Soon afterwards, in 1950, Jack's parents, Marvel and Ruth Parsons, divorced. He saw little of his father in the years to come. This would haunt Jack for the rest of his life, compounded by the fact that he always strived to find that father figure he so longed for. It has often been said that brilliance and genius go hand in hand with emotional turmoil, leading to the complicated, insecure, sometimes offensive and eccentric human being, which aptly describes the brilliant Jack Parsons. After Jack's parents divorced, his mother Ruth agreed with her parents, Walter and Carrie Whiteside, that they should live together for the sake of young Jack. The Whitesides moved to Los Angeles and purchased a home in the posh town of Pasadena. Jack was fortunate enough to grow up in a wealthy environment with servants, which gave him plenty of time for his wild and imagination to flourish. It wasn't long before he came across Jules Verne and his classic book From the Earth to the Moon. This is a story about a group of American soldiers who designed a plan to send themselves into low Earth orbit and beyond on a journey to orbit the moon. Then the young Jack Parsons eventually found the popular magazine Amazing Stories, which was the first magazine that concentrated solely on space age fiction. Here we see more than just a hint of how this young Jack Parsons' passion for rocket technology stood out for most children his age. There was a little inspiration in the 1920s and 30s for a child fascinated by rockets to pursue this as a career. In fact, rockets were comic book lore, and although they were written about in some non-fictional articles, they were not considered part of the scientific literature and therefore were not to be taken seriously. Further, that meant that there were no courses on rocket science in the education system available at that time, so there was no guidance for anyone wanting to pursue a path to know what was going on in the aerospace industry. But that didn't deter Parsons with his passion for rockets, as he was already dreaming of interplanetary travel when most children his age were off chasing each other in hide-and-seek games and or acting out their favorite movie idols. Individuals like Jack stand out from the rest of us, although to be fair, without the rest of us, there wouldn't be a society for exceptional people to flourish. More often than not, people and women like Parsons usually defy conventional thinking and walk a path to greatness that then leads people to ponder their greatness for centuries to come. We have seen many examples of this in history in areas such as mathematics, physics, philosophy, medicine, both conventional and alternative, and in music, including jazz, right up to contemporary genres. You occasionally see it in politics, although not as much these days, as the message to anyone who dares to have a mind of their own is usually offered a fact-based report other than the fictional Warren Commission report for their reading entertainment. To add to Parsons' mystic, he was not exactly a stellar student. In fact, he was considered to have been below average by the educational system that more often than not misses the real intelligence and potential in students such as Parsons. The educational system tends to judge intelligence on how well students memorize and regurgitate their answers on paper. It makes one wonder how many seemingly and wrongful labeled unintelligent students have been deprived of their rightful place in history and how society has been cheated out of their brilliance and genius. And to further compound the mystic about Parsons, he was considered to have had a learning disorder. It is now called dyslexia, a disorder that causes the individual to read words in sentences in different orders or to misspell them. Author John Pendle writes, throughout his life he would misspell words, and his handwriting in particular, the words usually printed in capitals rather than written in cursive, indicates a learning disorder. At the time, dyslexia was not considered a legitimate complaint, and children who had suffered from it were generally considered to be backwards or stupid. For anyone, let alone such an avid reader as Parsons, the variable grades that resulted from his learning disorder would have only fueled a dislike for establishment education. Thankfully, society has now recognized that dyslexia is no determination of intelligence. In fact, in some cases, people with dyslexia have above average intelligence and creativity, as was apparent with Jack Parsons. How ironic then that Jack, who was constantly being harassed and bullied in school, would be rescued on one such occasion by a fellow student who himself had dyslexia, Edward Foreman. The two students would soon become lifelong friends and future collaborators in the pursuit of rocket science, producing work that would reverberate for decades to come. If the idea of two people with dyslexia accidentally meeting and then going on to make a major contribution to the aerospace industry seems coincidental, it gets even better. Jack Parsons' world by day. A well-known rocket scientist by the name of Robert Goddard had started writing his theories down long before Jack Parsons arrived on the scene, notwithstanding the Russians. It would take another book to discuss Goddard's contribution to the world of rocketry. But where Goddard retreated into obscurity after being constantly ridiculed by the media for his theories on rocket science, Parsons was the opposite, who was much more confident, not caring at all about what people or the media had to say about it. Parsons enrolled at Pasadena Junior College, but because of the Great Depression in 1930, their family fortune dwindled, and he was forced to drop out after one term and find work. However, 18-year-old Parsons turned this unfortunate situation into an asset when he found work at the Hercules Powder Company in Los Angeles, which was known as the largest TNT production company for the United States during World War I. It was here that Parsons began to hone his skills in the mixing of propellants that he would incorporate into his theories on rocket propulsion systems in the future. It was here, too, that he became an expert on chemicals and explosives, two very important aspects of rocket technology. Parsons' friend Ed Foreman also worked at the Hercules Powder Company as an apprentice, and they eventually collaborated on developing rocket technology to the point where their trial-and-error approach to solving problems now required the type of mathematical calculations that they both lacked. Even though Parsons was by no means devoid of mathematical abilities, as his papers with numerous algebraic equations show, he lacked the necessary skills for differential calculus necessary for the complex calculations needed in rocket technology. By chance, a set of circumstances that could only apply to Parsons and Foreman led to a direct connection to the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. Caltech needs no introduction, and a quick Google search will show the many famous scientists who were either students and/or employees there. What's even more amazing is Caltech's acceptance of two seemingly uneducated individuals, Parsons and Foreman, when they casually walked into the preeminent university in 1935 looking for the author of an article on rocket technology published in the Los Angeles Times. It's another example of Parsons' confidence and refusal to be intimidated by the appearance of what many would consider academic men beyond reproach. The author's name of this article was William Bollet. A graduate student in aeronautics, the study of motion in air, named William Bollet had presented a paper at Caltech on the recent work of a member of the Amateur Austrian Society for Rocket Technology, Eugen Sanger. Sanger, who had conducted most of his work apart from the scientific establishment and without any outside funding, spoke in strong optimistic terms about the possibility of rockets being used to power aircraft. What the newspapers were most excited about was the mention of maximum velocities and breaching of the stratosphere. Parsons and Foreman walked right into Bollet's office and introduced themselves, expressing interest in his work. But what Parsons and Foreman really saw in this article was a potential for rockets to be used other than in aircraft. For them, they saw the obvious means of leaving Earth's atmosphere for LEO. It's an example of how Parsons envisioned a future for rockets as compared to his academic contemporaries who lacked the insight of a man like Parsons, going as far as to mock those who even suggested the use of rockets in any other capacity besides aircraft. However, some of that mocking behavior from his peers would turn out to be justified given the present state of NASA's non-existent manned launch capabilities to LEO, which is no fault of the brilliant Parsons. Bollet was busy with his own research unrelated to rockets, but was impressed enough upon meeting Parsons and Foreman for the first time to recommend them to a graduate student named Frank Molina. It was this introduction that formed the team of Parsons, Foreman, and Molina. Frank Molina had studied mechanical engineering and had an interest in interplanetary spaceflight. However, at the time of meeting Parsons and Foreman at Caltech, he was working at the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology, GALCET, specifically in the wind tunnel experimenting with scale models designed for aircraft submitted by several aviation companies. But he was so impressed with Parsons and Foreman's work that he immediately saw the possibilities which rekindled his own passion for rockets. Since the 1930s was a time when rockets were not a part of any academic curriculum, this meant of course that there were no scientists trained in any aspects of rocketry, or better put, there were no rocket scientists as of yet. Rockets were only taken seriously when seen on the big screen alongside Buck Rogers. This is all the more remarkable when considering the future achievement of Parsons, who had little or no more than a high school education, whose work would be credited with solving problems that eventually contributed to the success of the space shuttle program. But at the time, Frank Molina clearly saw Parsons' potential, regardless of his lack of academic credentials. Pendle quotes Frank Molina as saying, "It seems to me that at most he had finished high school. When I met him, he already had a certain amount of experience with the manufacturing of explosives, but I think what was outstanding about him was that he was not of any fixed view on which way to go. He had a very flexible sort of attitude."